Okay, we're going to take a look at this engine. This is a GM engine with a distributor in it. It's a V8, 7.4 liter, similar to 5.7 liters, 5 liters, 4.3 liters. They're pretty much the same. We're going to be looking at if you want to take your distributor out. So this one still has a distributor in it. As you can see, it's on the back of the engine. Cap is a little different. The spark plug wires are coming out the sides, as you can see here. They're not coming out the top. And one of the other towers, which is this one right here, is for your coil. So your ignition coil is here, sends high voltage through this wire, goes into the cap on the side here, but ultimately, if you look closely, you can see it actually comes to the center. And then underneath the cap, we have a rotor that distributes the spark to all the different cylinders as it spins around. So each of these towers, as they come around, is going to get the high voltage. Then the voltage goes down the spark plug wire, and then you have 4 cylinders on each side. So you have 4 along this side, and then you'll have 4 on the other side. One of the things you need to identify if you want to learn a little about firing order is which side of the engine. Is it this bank or is it this bank that is where cylinder number 1 is? So one of the ways you can tell is if you look at the front of the engine and you look at the valve covers. This is a valve cover here. Might be a little hard to see, but if you look at it from the side, what you'll notice is one of the valve covers is a little further forward than the other side. This side here compared to this side here. This valve cover on this side is about 1 inch further forward, maybe 1/2 inch to 1 inch. And that's the key right there, is one side of a V8 has to have the cylinders about 1/2 inch further forward, because the cylinder 1 over here and cylinder 2 over here are on the same journal of the crankshaft. So since they share a journal on the crankshaft, they need to be offset slightly by about 1/2 inch. So that is one way you can tell. Some manufacturers will actually mark the intake manifold on the top. I don't see it on this one, but you might see, like, printed right in the intake, it might have a 1, and then a 3, 5, and then a 7, and then the other side would be 2, 4, 6, and 8. Typically, that's how they're numbered, odd and even. So because cylinder 1, again, this valve cover on the top here is slightly further forward than the other one on the other side, this would be where cylinder 1 is located. So this right here is your cylinder number 1. Once you know where number 1 is, then you know where 3, 5, and 7 are, because that's how they order them on these engines. And again, the other side would be the even 2, 4, 6, and 8. If you come back here to the distributor cap, so let's say you remove all the spark plug wires off the engine, and you're going to replace the cap or the rotor, or even take the whole distributor out of the engine. You're going to need to know where each of these wires go. So there's something called the firing order. And I looked it up. Most GM engines are the same for different manufacturers, Ford, Chrysler, foreign car manufacturers. You're going to have to look up the order. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Engines don't fire in numerical sequence. They fire in a mixed up numerical sequence, which makes the engine run a little smoother, and I'll explain that in a minute. But I looked up the firing order for this engine. Again, sometimes they print it on the manifold or somewhere on the engine, and again, I do not see it on this engine in any place that is easily found. So you're gonna have to look it up. On this engine, it's 18436572. 18436572. And we're gonna put a document in your module that shows you that sequence. And again, they're not all the same. Different manufacturers number their engines differently in their firing order, so you need to look that up. Why did they do that? Well, this is number 1 right here, and number 8 is the second cylinder to fire, which is all the way on the back on this side of the engine. 1, 8, 4 comes back on this side over here, or actually 1, 8, and then 4 over here, then 3, 5, 6, 7, and then 2 over here. They're actually hopping from one side of the engine to the other side when they're firing this thing. So actually doing that makes the engine run smoother, because if they fired it, let's say 1, 3, 5, 7 in a row, let's say 1, 3, 5, 7, this whole side of the engine would get shoved down because of the force of the pistons getting on the compression stroke and on the power stroke. So what they do is they split the power stroke up so it's jumping from one side of the engine to the other side of the engine. So the engine will actually run a lot smoother designed like that. So again, firing order is not a sequence that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's going to be a mixed up set of numbers that you have to look up. Now the reason that's important is because if you look at your distributor cap, they actually on this one number them. If you look closely, you can actually see a 5 there. You can see a 3 there. That looks like a 7. And we have a 1 over there. So there's a 7 there. And then on this side, if we lift up the coil, you can see 6, 4, 2, and 8 on this side. So what we do, if we're gonna have to put our wires back on, you wanna know which cylinder you have to put it on. So a lot of times they're only gonna tell you where cylinder number 1 is. So they might only have a mark on the cap that says this is number 1. So what you're gonna need to know is what is the sequence as it spins around. Let's say the rotor in this cap spins clockwise in this direction. So that would mean that this tower here would be number 1. Okay, and as we come around, you'll see over here, this is 8 over here, and then we have 2, 4, 6, 5, 3, 7. Okay, so it's basically designed to follow the firing order. So if the cap is numbered, you kind of have a little easier job to figure out which wire goes to what. As long as you know where cylinder number 1 is, you know, because this is number 1, that you're going to run number 1 wire back up to the cap where the number 1 is on the distributor cap, and then keep going in sequence. So this one here on this side behind number 1 would be number 3, and then you would come back and make sure that that cap, that wire goes back to number 3, which is right here. And this one here would be number 5. And again, make sure that you come back and make sure it goes to number 5, which would be right here. And number 7. So you just want to make sure each wire goes back to the right place on the distributor cap. This side here, again, is the even side. So again, you have 2, 4, 6, and 8 on this side. And again, 2 being in the front, you would want to make sure this wire goes back up into number 2, and 4, 6, and then 8 to make sure they're in the right order. And again, some manufacturers don't give you the information on the distributor cap. They're gonna maybe just tell you where cylinder 1 is, like on the tower, and then they'll say maybe the rotation of the distributor is clockwise. So that means if you know the firing order, you're gonna be able to mark the cap with number 1 here, and then number, let's say it's 1, 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 7, 2. 1, 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 7, 2. So it just keeps repeating itself in that order. So if you know that sequence, then you know which wire has to go to number 3, which wire has to go to number 6, and so on. And again, if you get 2 of these wires switched around, you're gonna have a major misfire because you're firing the cylinders when they aren't at top dead center of the power stroke. It's right at the top of the compression stroke, right before the power stroke. So you wanna make sure that the wires are not mixed up, or your engine's either not gonna run or it'll run really bad because you're firing 2 cylinders or more at the wrong time. Another thing that we have on engines with distributors is if you look in the front of the crankshaft, there's something called a harmonic balancer. This is the rear of the engine. That's where the flywheel is, which you can see there has teeth on it. That's actually where your starter motor engages into when you crank your engine. There's a little gear on the starter and a big gear on the flywheel. On the front of the engine, you're going to have something called a harmonic balancer, which is this steel wheel that you see. There's like a little notch in there. And there's actually a scale. If you look closely, there's actually a set of numbers on there. And if you look to the left of the heavy notch that you see there right in the middle, you'll see a number 10. And then if you go to the right of the big notch, you'll see 10, and then there's a 20, and if you keep going around, there's a 30, and I believe you can even see a 40, and I think there's even a 50 over there. These numbers represent the timing marks of the ignition. Now, what I mean by timing marks is there's a slash or a notch right on the harmonic balancer where top dead center of number 1 is. So that line that you see on the harmonic balancer is top dead center. And then there's a mark right here on the, it's kind of like a piece of aluminum that sticks out of the front of the engine. If those two lines are matched up exactly, that means cylinder number 1 is exactly at top dead center. So that's how you can actually set the engine up. If you're going to be installing the distributor, we'll talk about that in a minute, you actually have to set the engine on top dead center of number 1 before you put the distributor back in. So we'll look at that in a minute. If you start the engine up and you want to adjust something called ignition timing, which is related to when the spark is going to come out of the distributor and go to that cylinder, it's not right at 0. It's not. They do not fire the cylinder right at top dead center because the spark, believe it or not, takes some time to get from the distributor cap to the spark plug. By the time it gets there, because the engine is moving so fast, it will be late. It'll actually fire the cylinder when the piston's already starting to go down, and we don't want that to happen. So most engines, your ignition timing is set slightly before top dead center. And the manufacturer determines what the optimum base setting of your ignition timing is. So for an example, let's say our engine is supposed to be set at 10 degrees before top dead center. So again, on that scale, if you look to the right of the notch, you'll see a 10 there. And again, there's a 20. Each one of those little lines represents 2 degrees. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, and so on. And what basically happens here is if we put a mark, let's say with an orange crayon right on that 10 there, what will happen is when we start the engine up, we're going to use a tool called a timing light. What the timing light does is it actually is going to be hooked up to number 1 spark plug, and it's like a strobe light. The strobe light will flash when the spark goes down the spark plug wire. So if you hold the timing light in the front of the engine, I'll show you what a timing light looks like in a minute, it'll actually make it look like, and if you notice what a strobe light does, it makes motion freeze when the flash happens. It'll actually make it look like the harmonic balancer isn't moving. It'll like stand still, but it's still moving. It's just the strobe light flashes so quick that it makes it look like it's not moving. So if the line on the front here, that aluminum part that's sticking out, isn't lined up exactly where the line is that you put on at number 10, what you're going to have to do is twist the distributor. So if we go into the back of the engine again, while it's running, there's a bolt on the bottom of the distributor. You look right there, and that's actually a little bracket that holds the distributor in place. If we loosen that bolt up, we can actually twist the distributor. You basically can turn it one way or the other if you loosen that up.